So Fujifilm has been making cameras for some time, and if you notice, they're very tactile use. The only difference from this bunch of our cameras is this one, no back screen. It's actually a film camera. This is one of my film cameras that I started back in the, I would say, late 70s, 77, 78. It's ST705. So I never thought I was going to be working for the company, and setting the camera I started. It's making been fantastic cameras. But if you notice, as our silvers, the style, the command dials, that's the classic look that they take from back from our film cameras from the 70s and the 80s. And it's very tactile, and that's what draws our fan base that wants something very simple operation, and you could just use your shutter, aperture, and ISO, very simple like the predecessors of these cameras. So let me take this one out. And I'm going to do is start this PowerPoint real quick. Can everybody see the PowerPoint? And see, let's check. So I want to make sure, let me check on chat if you could see a full page of the PowerPoint. Okay. So our cameras, one of the things that one of our well-known photographers that's been shooting for film from the 1930s to the 1960s, it's Henry Cartier. And what his saying is, really your first 10,000 images is probably your worst image. And that's really those 10,000 has been his practicing, getting his eye refined, what he sees, what he's looking through. So it's really getting out there shooting, and really not just shooting. Look at your images, maybe the same day and the next day, and then go back a month later and look at those images. I bet you by going back a month later, you're gonna ask yourself, why did I shoot this? Or you can actually find out, this is more my style, and now you can readjust to your style of photography. It could be something you like getting close, particular color, maybe a black and white, kind of introduce you to different types of art or photography, that way you see things. Another quote that Cartier had is, it's really to, in your head, examine, think what the image you want it to look like. So if it's, you're looking at a lake or an ocean, you might think, what kind of condition of light will make this image really pop? Could be a sunrise, could be a sunset. A lot of times you don't know. Sometimes you wake up morning, you go with your camera, maybe it's not in the morning. So you go back in the sunset, and maybe the color's nicer, and maybe the compositions can be nicer. So sometimes going to these locations, and maybe the light's not ready, and maybe it's not time really to take the picture. So it's really, it's all about light. It's really the photography, it's all about light, what we see. Of course, the cameras can gather more light, and it allows you to work with longer exposures. So that's why a lot of things like astrophotography really got very popular, because of mirrorless cameras. Let me switch this here quick. All right. So one thing about the camera, I'm going to go to another shot, that our camera, very simple. It's aperture on the ring. The only one that does not have aperture on the lens itself. And if you ever look at the lens reading will say 1.2, pretty much what your aperture will be. R will stand for aperture ring. That's what R says on the lens itself. And then some of the lenses, pretty much the last 5 years, the lens has been weather resistant. So you have a WR, and then your filter size. So the R stands for you have an aperture ring. The only one that does not have aperture rings is your XC lenses, and also our pancake lens, our 27 millimeter. So when they don't have an aperture ring, you'll be using your front command wheel to change your aperture. So on this, if you want to do aperture priority, you could put your shutter to A, ISO to A, now you're in aperture priority. If you want fully automatic, what people call program mode, you put everything on A, shutter on A, ISO. The camera's fully what we call program mode. It will look at, make the meter adjustment. Also, it will kind of look at the movement to increase your shutter speed and light condition. By putting on A, you have choices if you want automatic at set of ISOs between 160 to 800 or 1600 and up. So we'll go some of those things on the menus, how you can make those changes. So if you want shutter priority, you just leave this on A, get out of A or out of A on the shutter. Now you're in shutter priority, so you can control your shutter. Maybe you want to control your shutter. Maybe you're taking pictures of action and you definitely need to be, say, maybe a minimum 500 or 1000 just to really cover some of your action so they won't be soft or blurry. So those are the things that we controlled, some of our controls of our kind of our pyramid. So you usually have a pyramid that goes this way, and that's really controlling your light. One thing I want to talk about too is our media cards. XT1, XT2, XT3, XT4, including our GFX cameras. We have two types of SD cards. One is UHS-1, one is UHS-2. The UHS-2 has two set of pins, and the standard UHS-1 has one set of pins. These cameras were able to handle the two pins. Just think of, say, a fast car, maybe a Corvette. It requires maybe super unleaded instead of unleaded. But you put in unleaded fuel, what happens on the highway? Maybe it hesitates, has a rough start. Same thing with these cameras. They're high performance. I would highly recommend to put the UHS-2 cards, and they're pretty much available anywhere. They eventually were available as 2014 when we started with XT1. Now pretty much all stores will carry that. So if you put the UHS-2 on certain cameras that don't take advantage of UHS-2s, you can still use them. Doesn't mean you can use UHS-1s on XT3, XT2. It's just going to take a little bit longer to buffer. This little light in the back, it's actually, if you see it blinking pretty fast, that means it's filling up the buffer. It's taking a while to write to the card. That's a good indication that you want to go to a faster card. A lot of these cards now are 285, almost 300. Or if you want, you could look at some of the cards will say V30. V30, it really means that you could do 4K video at 30 frames per second. Then you got your V60, 60 frames per second, 4K, and they do go up to V90. So that's another indication you could do. But you definitely, UHS-2s will do really good. You can get it with UHS-1, especially if you're just taking pictures with the landscape. But one thing when you're doing landscape with a GFX 100, they're bigger files. They will take a little bit longer with UHS-1s. So put that on the side. One thing about our cameras is the Q menu. Pretty much all of our cameras have the Q menu. Q menu is pretty much just what we call quick access. By pressing the Q, you can program these functions, something that you normally want to access, that instead of going through the menus, you can go through the Q menu. I'm going to go over more of that on our cameras. And just to give you an idea of what the Q menu, and the Q is the one right here. We'll say Q, depends on the location. And that's by pressing the Q, you get different setups. Using your joystick, or you can have touch screen. You can touch over the subject. Use your rear command wheel to turn your different modes. You can also press your touch screen if you have a touch screen and select by going across. So that's another way you could do to be selecting your cameras. But again, I'll show you how we could do it. Program the Q menu so you can take advantage of some of the features that you access quite a bit. Then we have what we call the drive button. The drive button for XT1s, XT2s, XT3s, XT4s, we actually put it right above, below the ISO. There's a little switch in the front that you could turn back and forth to the left. The drive has your different functions. So it'll give you an example of some of the functions on this drive. We'll have panoramic, advanced filters, and that's considered under ADV. Double exposure, if you're going to do a single shot, so every time you press your shutter, it's just one shot. Then we have CL. CL means you're going to continuous low, could be from 3 to 8 shots. CH could go from, we'll say from 8 to 15, or you can go 8 to all the way to 30 in electronic shutter. And then you have bracket. Bracket, you can expose your ISOs, your shutter, you can expose different color file simulations and white balance. So there's different things you could bracket. And then the very last one is your video. So you could do video. And again, I will go through those menus on those different styles, what your options are on each one. So that's the XT1. So if you have an XE3, instead of having a dial, this is the one we call the flat top. You'll have a drive button. It will say drive with a little mode, and it might have a little trash can in the bottom. So it's a dual purpose. If you're viewing your images, you can press that to delete, but that is your drive. Also same as your other cameras. And by pressing this one you go up and down to select your choices. And other cameras will have drive, just like our XE3, except this one will have 2 different advanced filters, so you can actually apply 2 different custom ones. And then we have what we call our A7. You have more of a mode, command mode window. So you have pictures of, so if you're going to do action, you're going to do landscape or portraiture. So we got these more of a mode windows, very similar to your other drive modes. So operation of our lenses, to control if you want to do manual, if you want to do single focus or continuous tracking focus. On most of your DSLRs, you know, they are different controls, different parts of the cameras. Our cameras either going to be a rotating knob. So from S to continuous to M. So if I want to take one shot, it just focus once, takes the shot. If I want continuous tracking on C, it will constantly be tracking the person. So if the person's moving back and forth, you're doing sports, you're doing wildlife, it allows you to track that person while shooting. And of course, you can also move it into continuous high, and you can do quite a multiple frames doing that. And then M, you have for manual focus, and you have your manual focus ring in front. Usually if you have a zoom lens, your rear wheel or your wheel ring in the back will allow you to focus or zoom in and out. And then we also have sort of what we call a slider. The slider will be similar to our X100 models. They'll be on the side, and it just slides up and down. So the top is your manual focus, continuous, and single focus. So that's what will be considered on the slider. And for XA7s and T200s, they don't have any sliders, so you just go into the menu and change it. It's under your focus modes, and that allows you to change the different modes of focusing. So for optical stabilization, typically on our zoom lenses, we have a switch that you could turn on or off. And the reason there's a switch, if you're on a tripod, if you're doing longer exposures, you don't want to use the optical stabilization. I would say majority of our zoom lenses have optical image stabilization, exception for the 16 to 55 2.8. That lens does not have it. Our new lens, 16 to 80, does not have a switch, but it does have 6-stop stabilization, but it has some smart code. So if the camera's sitting on a platform, tripod, table, actually will turn off the stabilization. Again, you also do have that option to turn off the stabilization from the menu. You could actually have that in your favorites or a function of any of your buttons to control your stabilization. And then XC lenses or the XC consumer lenses, that will be controlled in the camera body also. The only 2 prime lenses does have optical stabilization is our macro 80 and our 200 2.0. Those are only 2 prime lenses that have it built in. We also have single focus, spot focus, zone focus. That's directly in your menu. Allows you, depends how you want to focus your subjects. So single focus if you're doing macro, wildlife, well, maybe not wildlife, maybe you're going to do zone detection because you're going to work with longer lenses, but definitely macro, landscape, maybe product shots. Just to give you an idea what it looks like, is you press your menu and you want to go into focus and go into focus mode. And you have several choices. On our previous models, we had 3 choices. Now we have 4 choices. So single point. So if I choose single point, and if I push the joystick or a function button, will activate your points or your box. you can use your rear command wheel to size your box. You can actually size it very small. So if you're doing portraits and you want to just focus on their eyes, allows you just to go right at their eye to make sure that's the most important part of the body that you want that to be focused. Again, in general, size box would be right about that size. And then you can have press your shutter, and now you can actually use your joystick to move around according to where your subject is. So the next mode is your zone. Your zone mode is, if you activate it, it does move around, does size up, but this is perfect for any lenses that are longer, say, than 50 millimeter. So long telephotos, allows you to capture action, any movement. It's just really, what it does is a highly active focus points that will track and focus and track the subject. So any long lenses, that would be perfect, especially if you're trying to capture any wild subjects, and especially if you're looking at the center of the lens. That's where you want to be for action. Also, you have wide. What wide does, you have every point of, there's about 425 points of focusing points in the camera. What it'll do, it uses all the focusing points to edge, and that works perfectly for any lenses that 28 and wider. So if you're looking from a distance and you notice the person is walking into the subject, you're waiting for it to come into the frame, you press your shutter halfway, it will start locking your subject till you kind of recompose where you want it in the picture, and then press fully to get the picture captured. So anything incoming could be people, animals, trains, cars. It's a good way to track people. And then your last one, it's all. I think that's the most convenience to use. What it does depends on the size of your focusing point. So if I activate it, if I make it bigger, it'll go now to zone, because it wants to go into zone for action. If I make it any bigger, it'll go to wide. So now you don't have to go into the menu just to change and choose your different functions of focusing points. It's all done by your joystick, activating it, and by using your rear dial to make it resize.
Hey, Louis.
Yes.
There was a quick question about autofocus. Do you mind talking about that real quick?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Jim asked, when shooting continuous at full speed for birds or horses, would pre-focus be of any benefit? Can the 100 to 400 handle all of that?
Oh, definitely, yes. I've used it in northern Washington to photograph the eagles, especially towards December. And that's what I'll do, is I'll do the zone focus. I'll put continuous tracking, that's C for focus. And then a lot of times I'm going to be setting the shutter mechanism to be doing from 5 to 8 frames. You could do up to 11 frames. If you need to do more, you could switch over to electronic, and that'll get you up to 30 frames per second. I just got to remember the 30 frames per second or 20, they do have a crop of 1.2, 1.29. But when you're using a zoom lens, pretty much that's the crop you're going to be centering anyways. But it does give you that option. Mechanical wise, the X-T3 does 11 frames and X-T4 does 15 frames. So it's already going pretty fast already for capturing some shots, for multiple shots. Is that the question that he had? And I've used it with the teleconverter, both 1.2 and, I'm sorry, the 1.4 and the 2X with the with the 100-400. When it first came out, we did have it a little bit slow, anything shooting over f9, but we did a firmware update a couple of years ago, and that really improved the focusing tracking, and that was while X-T2 was available. So definitely was faster with X-T3 and of course with X-T4. But if something is slow, especially if X-T2, then make sure you go to our website and download the firmware, and now we'll cover that in our one of our menu setups, how you do your firmware updates, both for cameras and lenses.
Perfect. So you find the pre-focus does help with that, though? I know that I typically turn that off a lot of times. But...
Oh, so you mean pre-focus mode? That mode could drive you a little bit crazy. We also have what we call pre-shot. If you have the XT3 and XT4, we have a mode called pre-shot. If you have pressed your shutter, it'll be recording 15 shots at a time, not into the card, into the buffer. And when you finally start seeing the bird fly away, press your shutter, you might be doing 15 frames per second. So it's going to record those 15 frames while the bird was moving, plus pre-15 frames before that. So you make sure you get the movement from the flight taking off the bird. And that, again, I'll be covering that a little bit later. I'd rather use that than pre-focus. A lot of times pre-focus definitely use more of the battery. But if you're very critical, yes, you could turn it on. Some people use it maybe for, say, sports, maybe at the quarterback before you threw the ball, because you don't know when. But for most, I don't use it. And if I need to use something that needs that quite of an action, you could do pre-shots. And again, I will cover that. Our next one is the auto settings. Most of the auto settings we discussed on XT2, XT3, really for auto, this camera, XT1, XT2, XT3, you just put all in A's. But if you have the XT20, XT30, even the XT10, we actually have a switch. And let me go over to the camera mode. So we do have a switch. It's right next to the right of your shutter, right behind the aperture or your shutter release. This little mode switch, if you press it to auto, it says right here auto, and it goes to a mode that we call scene recognition. So scene recognition, if a camera sees a face, it will go to portrait mode. And that means it may shoot at 2.8, depends what lens, maybe f4. So it's trying to give you a shallow depth of field. If it sees action, it's going to increase the shutter speed so you can stop action. If it sees mountains or trees, it's going to go to landscape mode. So it's going to try to give you a bigger aperture, maybe f16, f11. If it sees maybe a flower, it's going to go to macro mode. So that's what we call scene recognition. In some cameras, we have this switch. So if you have the XT30, XT20, and somebody wants to take your picture and then you don't want anything to be touched, just switch it over to auto. They just have to press the shutter. It will do everything for you. And then as soon as you switch it back, you go back to all the settings you were left off. Again, now we have XA7s, X200s. We have a SR. So when you put in an R, SR, the same thing, scene recognition. But we do have other program modes, preset modes that allows you to go in there and do some adjustments. You do have, let me double check if I have a battery in here. It seems pretty light. Let me grab a battery. Let's see, turn it on, see if I can bring it up. So if I go into one of these modes, so if I go to sports, there's my night sky, those are my panoramic. So different modes that you can see, but what scene recognition, if I go to scene recognition, I could go into my menu and go into my scene recognition modes, camera modes. Some of these have presets, and you can use some of the command dials to switch it back and forth. Right now, I turn off my rear display, and probably because I don't have a lens on it, but allows you to use your command wheel to go to different scene modes if you want to control them. And it's really same thing if you want to control these modes. You can use your different controls, your scenes. But that's what we call scene modes on these cameras. The XT2s, XT30s, X Pro 3s does not have any scene modes. You just have these either program mode or you control your aperture or shutter. So as we discussed earlier on, Chris, is the display on my PowerPoint, is it full page or full screen?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure you're not looking at a little stamp size. So to go into our firmware updates. It's on our website. You can simply go to fuji-com or fuji-x.com. Instead of putting the long HTTP file, Fujifilm Up support, you could go in there, select support, and you could go in there and select any firmware updates, because we do firmware updates for cameras, for lenses, and also for flash. XF500, you can actually update that flash. What you have to do is you can download the firmware, you put it on an SD card. Any SD card, you can have pictures in an SD card. You just download it to your desktop, drag it to the card. Make sure you don't drag it into any particular folder. It has to be outside of a folder. And to do that, is I'm going to switch modes. To do that, you want to do is press, you want to make sure I have a card in here. It's just for you to see your information, your firmware updates, you got to make sure you have a card in the camera. You have the camera turned off. Press your display button, hold it down, and then turn on the camera. And it's going to give you the different modes. It's either going to be body version or lens version. If you have the flash on there, it's going to give you the flash version. And then if you have your updates, you can press menu OK, and then select what you want to update, either the body or the lens. See if I could darken this exposure so you can see it. Give me a second. Wrong way. It's still kind of bright, but you can see a little bit more. So from your joystick or touchpad, you can select and just say OK. You could press menu OK. If you don't have, if it doesn't find it, sometimes if you already downloaded the same file, what it'll do, it'll attach a number saying this is your second download. You have to remove the number at the end. It's right before .dat. You move the number in the parentheses. And by removing that, it will recognize. If it has those parentheses, that number, it's not going to recognize. Just go highlight your mouse and delete those three items, the number and the two parentheses, and that will actually load it. And it's very simple. We do updates pretty much all the way back to XT20s. If something that the engineers can improve on things, you bet they will go on it and improve anything on the camera bodies and lenses. Again, well, some of the accessories like our XF500 flash, and also can be an improvement on some fixes on bugs and things like that. So kind of add new features to your cameras. So it's pretty exciting. And if you have trouble doing it, there are some videos that we posted on YouTube. You could go to Fujifilm Fuji Guys and look at firmware updates, or Fujifilm USA on YouTube. And we also posted how you could do a firmware update. Again, it's very simple. Go into our website, go to the model of your model of the camera. It will tell you the date it got released, and you can compare the two firmware updates between the one you have in your camera and the ones on the website. One thing about our software, we do have, the way our cameras get clean, there's a ultrasound motion on the sensor that it actually will dissipate the dust. What it does, it moves the sensor so your dust can actually go down to the bottom of the sensor itself. It does a very good job. I had folks that had other cameras from our competitors, and it was just standard DSLRs, and they were surprised how they don't have to clean the sensor. If they do, very minimal. And these are the folks that are traveling through different parts of the world doing landscape photography. And it's amazing that they were surprised how clean it stays. So when you turn off the camera, that's when it activates it. You could turn it on by itself by going to the menu, or you could also say, I want to also turn on when you turn on the camera, but then you have some downtime. So we just leave it as default. Every time you turn off the camera, it will actually shake it off. What I also recommend, like I just mentioned earlier, that it does kind of shake it to the bottom of the sensor. What you want to do is, when you take it off, take a bulb, point the camera down, and just take air bulb and just go along and facing down so the dust will go down. To me, routinely, I will do that before I go over after a shoot, or I'll have something more compact when I actually put it in my camera bag and just a little bit slightly remove some of the dust. Also, too, when you remove these lens caps, you also want to do is when you remove both the body and the lens, put them together. Don't put them in your bag. Put them in your bag. I wouldn't put them in your pocket. That's where you have a lot of lint, especially if you put these open in your pocket. Guess what? You're going to get some of the debris into your lens, into the camera body. And you don't want to do that. That just leaves you more cleaning to your sensor. Also, if something's really stuck, normally we don't recommend, of course, Fuji doesn't recommend can of air. I've done it, but I do it very cautious. I've been doing it for 20 some years, but I'm not shaking the can, not tilting the can or operating upside down. But the safest will be the bulb. But if you need to remove something that's very stubborn, it's probably on the sensor itself. Then there's actually liquids that you could remove with some pads. And what you're doing is you're just applying a slight pressure, just like squeegee, go in one direction, flip it over, apply it again. You don't want to run it the same direction twice because you already have debris. You don't want to scratch it or add it somewhere else. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, of course, Action Camera can actually do it for you. They do it all every day, so they're experienced. So you do have that option if you don't want to do it yourself. Because I travel, I always carry a kit for my cameras just in case. Chances are I don't use it because I'm very cautious the way I store the lenses and the caps and how when I install the lens that I pointing the camera body down so prevents from any dust going in. And of course, if it's really windy, I will do it in the car before I go outside. So that's another way to think about what lens you want to use, do it in the car and then go outside without worry about getting dust. The Q menu. So if you want to customize your Q menu, nice thing about, I tell folks, when you get your camera, after a couple of weeks, couple of months you use it, there are certain things that you go into your menu that you tend to use a lot. Those things you actually could program into the Q menu. There's things you could also program to your function buttons, and we'll go over that. But for your Q menu, you could program that. So what you want to do when you go into your Q, you want to go into your wrench. You want to switch over to a different view. So when you go into your wrench, you go into buttons, second down, menu. Go to your right. Right here, you can customize. So normally the first set of rows, the number 4, I kind of leave it alone. I like what the factory says done. The first one you're looking at it is you could customize your settings. You have customs from 1 to 7. I normally leave that alone because I could go through my customs. This is your different autofocus modes, your dynamic range control, your white balance control. One down below, this is where your film simulation mode, so I leave that alone. The file size, what format, and this is where I want to customize. I think the previous model or when you get out of the box, it will say noise reduction, sharpening. That just applies into your JPEG, but this is the modes I like to use. To activate, highlight it over it, press your menu. You have 4 pages of things you can select. Different things you want to control. You can have none. But what I like is I will go something I use quite a bit, and that was go back manual assist mode. So those are your different tools for assisting for focus, peak focus, split image. Also, our new camera have the diamond pattern, and then different other ones, different colors. So those are the things I like using. So I have easy access just to the Q menu. Next one is I place shutter. What it is telling you where if I want to use mechanical shutter, electronic shutter, a combination of both, or have just electronic. I really enjoy doing black and white, especially my street photography. This will allow me to change the tonality on the black and whites. So this is really on XT4s, XT3s, those things. If you want, just like the days back when you were printing, you have different tonality paper. We call it different grades. Some have more contrast, some less contrast. One paper was warmer than others, cooler than others. This allows you to control plus or minus if you want it warmer or cooler. You can select your acros, your neopan, and I really like that extra features. Of course, if you shoot RAW with a JPEG, in RAW, you have really, it's just a raw information. There is no color sign, no white balance assigned, just a reference. It's really kind of light information. So that can be customized. And that's why when you look at RAW, it's very flat. I normally will shoot a RAW with a JPEG. The JPEG gives me the reference that I wanted to shoot, that film style. Could be black and white, could be Velvia because I'm doing landscape, maybe Astia because I want it very more neutral. So those are the different options. So I like to have those side by side. So if I want to change my RAW and maybe recover some of the highlights and shadows, that's the RAW gives you that ability to do. Next one is plus or minus, compensate your flash exposure, brighter or less brightness. So I place it right after, right above the control of your shutter or your flash. Sharpness, that's pretty standard. I didn't change that, I left it alone. But again, you could change it anything you want by pressing, looking at something that you do a lot. Maybe you want to change, we already got eye detection, maybe touch mode. So let's do touch mode. And there you go. If you want to change the modes of your touch panel, hit your Q, and then go over with your joystick or your pad and use your rear command wheel to go in and shoot the different modes. So what mode you want to do. So touchpad, you can have it off. So if you touch it, it won't focus. If you touch the pad, it will place the focusing box where you want to focus. When you press your shutter, then it'll focus. AF, what it does, if you move the box over the box, and what I'll do is I'll show you on different mode. So if I go in here and see if I have mine turned on. I think on this one, I have to switch this one. I think I have this one turned on. Here we go. So here, we're going to start off. So anything in here, what happens if you're taking a picture and you're pressing your nose close to your face, to the screen, it will move the box somewhere else. Right now, because we have it off, it's not moving the box anywhere. So we have, let's go to the next one. Then we have area. So what I'll do is it's going to move your focusing. It's not going to focus. It's just going to move it to the location. And me change to auto so we get more of a idea of what it's doing. So if we touch it, it's just going to put it right over where you want to focus, and you have to press your shutter. Then if you want to select autofocus, you select it, it's going to focus. Let me go higher. It's going to focus and give you the green box, and it's ready to go shoot. And the last one will be, we call shot. It will focus and take the picture. So you can move your focusing point and then take the picture. And then the very last one is off. A lot of times I have it off, but if you want to use the camera, like some people do by the hip, so instead of looking through the viewfinder, you have the camera very low. That is a nice feature if you want to touch and focus the area you want. So that is the control. You could turn it off in the menu. Now completely we'll turn it off just in case you do hit it by accident. Time by time that sometimes you'll touch the on and off controls, and then sometimes it can drive you a little bit crazy, and sometimes I'll just completely turn it off on the menu. So you do have that option. So we just went over the edit and quick saves. So those are your quick menus. So on X Pro 3 and also on XT4, you have a choice to make your Q menu either a black background or translucent background. When I say translucent, if you have your lens cap off, it will look at the subject and you actually will see that translucent of that subject or landscape, whatever you're doing, it's looking through the background of your camera, through the camera lens. So you have those two choices, but it's just on those two cameras. So custom. So this is where you customize anything that you want to apply to your JPEGs. And to give you an idea, let me select my other camera for that. Give me a second. Should be under. Okay, here we go. So in the menu, go to AF, you press your menu, go to AF, MF. So you go to, okay, we want to go to customs. So I want to make sure I didn't pass it up. Go into, I'm sorry, it's under IQ, your first one, page 3, go under custom settings. So these are the ones that you could customize. So you could choose the different films, sharpening, and everything else, but you can also customize them. So if you go to one down below, and here, by selecting, you have all these, you have 2 pages how you want to customize your custom 1, your custom 2, custom 3, and then save it. And you can actually name it. If you look at right at the top, I call C1 my street photography. So it's black and white. I really enjoy doing street photography in black and white mode. So that's why if I'm going to do street photography, I could go to my custom 1 and it's done. And I'm going to be shooting black and white. And you could choose different filter ratings or filter filtrations for red, blue, I'm sorry, red, green, and yellow filters. So then I have my landscape. My landscape, I'm using Velvia, and so on and so on. So these could be customized. So you could customize them, name them. So that way, when you're in the field, you just select what you want. Depends on the type of photography you want to shoot. So makes it very handy. All of our cameras have that. If you can't rename it, make sure you're updated on your firmware update. I think we did an update on the XT3 to do that. Not sure on XT2, but I have to check back for sure XT3, including our GFX. So what's neat about our camera XT200 and XT or XA7, it does have a Q menu, but it's different. The way you select, it's going to be everything driven by the Q menu. I think I turned off my display. Let me turn on my display. Oops, display. If you ever want to change your display, this is a good way to go. You want to go into screen setup. You want to go to your very last display custom settings. All the cameras have this. Press menu OK. So what you do, you have these check marks, little boxes. If you press your menu or you press your joystick to turn it on. So say I want to turn on frame guidelines. I like using frame guidelines. I like the electronic viewfinder or the electronic leveler, focus frame, distance. So here, histogram, you can also shooting modes. So all these things to be selected. The only time you don't want anything is maybe you don't only want maybe the metering or anything like that. So this is your photometer, shutter type, flash, continuous mode. So there's quite a few pages to go in here. So let me select, see what else. Battery, I definitely want battery. So when you go in here, let's see here, make sure, oh, I gotta make sure my touch screen's on. So if it doesn't come on, that's when you wanna touch your touch screen, make sure it's turned on. So touch screen, and will be also on the wrench. That will be considered as a button. Touch settings. And you go and turn these on. And usually from the factory, they are turned on. And the only time you don't want to use it, you could turn them off. And they're considered buttons to your screen. And then, oh, let me do one more. And then the very last one, if you want to shoot without lens, you have all these other ones. And then let's go to, so now, if you want to back up to your main menu on these cameras, hit your arrow. As soon as you hit the arrow, there's your Q. So your Q is really the same as our other cameras. It's just these cameras are all about touch control. And so you could touch control, you could hit OK, and you go back. So what we're showing about the film styles, you could select film styles. So if you go to, I think this is custom white balance. Let's go back. Film styles, I might have not turned it on, but you can choose your different film styles. So if you go in here to the films, or you know what, it's also on command. So let's go back to command. There's the film. So a lot of times if you don't see it, sometimes it depends on the mode drive you're in. So for film, press your film. And here you could choose the different modes and it gives you a pre and after. So let me put a lens just to give you an indication what it looks like. Let's see here. I'll take this lens off. Back on. So if you want to choose your film again, let's go back, go to film, and say you're looking at black and white, velvet or velvia. Let's see if I can find something colorful. So maybe the bulb, focus, press half shutter. Oh, let me go to, also, you could change focus. This is where your focus areas are. So if you want to focus, or you could do manual. So right now I'm going to do manual. So when you choose your film, say I want to do a black and white, what it does, you can actually do your comparison by going left and right of the screen. It's showing that you have velvia in here and black white over here, and what type. So it's a nice comparison that if you're on the street, you could be shooting. Again, this is on the T200 and X-A7. Those are your touch screens. So a little bit different from the, so this is what you consider your entry cameras. So those are the things that we touch. You can see the screen. Okay, let me get out of that color. So this is the different modes of colors. Splits, magenta, sepia. Also, we have my menu setting. So some of the cameras we do have, besides having you customize your functions, also customizing your cue menu, you can also have my menu. My menu, actually, I'd use it quite a bit, especially if the body of the camera has in-body stabilization. What it does, if you customize it, and as soon as you press your menu, that's the first thing you're going to see is my menu. Let me go over to my camera. So again, if you press camera, and you'll see my menu first before you can go any other options. And these are my favorite ones I will use. Touchscreen if I want to turn it off, face detection, and these can be added through your menu camera. I'm going to show, let's see if I can bring it up on the other one. You go into French, go into user setting. So in the user setting, you could format your cards. You could change time and date. Here's your menu setting. If you ever have a problem with the camera, it's not operating, it's not working like you got out of the box, this is what you want to do is your reset. You had your shooting reset, only does the minimal on your reset on your menu, and then you have the last one, factory reset. The only thing the factory reset leaves is your time and date. But if it's, just think of it as computer code and it overlaps different functions, sometimes it slows down the camera, you want to do a menu reset. I happen to do often because when I'm doing demos in the past or doing something custom to demonstrate, a lot of times I'll just set the camera back to factory. So that is what that is. If we go to menu, also here's your control your sensor. Right now it's set to turn off, but you could also switch it to turn on when you turn on the camera. My menu is, if you want to add items, you just go add items, and then you have 3 pages, actually more than 3 pages. It goes through each item that you want to change. So if I want to change my black and white control, hit yes. And if I want to add maybe chrome effect, hit yes. So now if I press my shutter, hit my menu, those are the first things you're going to have, your favorites. So that's another way to get access to your favorites besides your cue menu and your function buttons. On your function buttons, you want to do is for your functions, if you hold your display button for 3 seconds. It will give you the different modes and the locations. So I'm going to do is set up the other camera. If you look, it will give you the different locations, what they're normally at. But if you want to change it, say if I want to change instead of my face detection from my function button on the top, you have 7 pages of things you can select. So that is a lot of information. But if there's things that you want to have quick access, you could change what the camera came from the factory. So a lot of times, if I'm going to take pictures of people, could be a reception, could be a wedding, I will use many options for face detection that will help me take portraits. If I'm doing sports, then maybe I'll choose autofocus, custom, continuous tracking, anything that will help me for tracking on speed. So those things can be changed within seconds. You can modify those really quickly, depends on your shoot. So that's what you call your my menu. So it's not every camera has it, but we did add it, some of them by firmware, but definitely XT3, XT4, and our GFX. Function buttons. Those are the function buttons we just did by pressing your display. If you have XT1, you could program for this functions to be also for focus selection. So those are the things that we change. But on XT2, we kind of change things. You can actually use these 4 pads as for function. So these are the 4 pads for function, left and right. So if I press left, it's going to give me my film simulation. If I press to the right, it's going to give me a white balance. If I press it to the top, it's going to be my multimeter. But also, you can make it just for your focusing points. So the cameras before the XT2, we didn't have a joystick. So to activate these points and move around, we have programmed this function for your joystick. Basically the same as joystick. But you also can program these for your functions. But now since your cameras have this joystick, there's no need to include these for focusing modes. Just leave it as for functions. So that's what, unless you have XT1 or XT10, you do have the option to dedicate these for your locations of your functions or dedication just for your focusing modes. So the hidden menus, that's what we just went over by pressing your display button for 3 seconds, and you can customize it. Again, you have 7 pages of those things you could customize. Button reset or button setup. So if you're shooting in a studio and then the studio's dark and you're only working with flash strobes, there are times that the only time you'll see light is when the strobes go off from your model or your product shots. It could be very dark to focus. Also, it could fluctuate your tonality. So the best thing to do is activate the camera and turn off your white balance modes, your live modes, turn back on. It allows you to see just like if you're looking at an optical camera. And to do that, you want to do is press your menu, go into your wrench. I think I got it right. Back up. Maybe it's on screen. So here's your modes you want to change. So when you do preview off, you can have preview with white balance only or off. So by turning it off and then turning natural live mode, that will give you your camera to give you, let me take off the lens. It's not going to give you the colors, and I might have it in black white. Should be no black whites. It's just going to give you a live mode. It's on bulb. Let's see here, change my. So it really is not going to give you much of a color, but at least it gives you all available light so you can see your subject. And that's what's nice about by doing that. And then you can actually program it as a function button. If you happen to do quite a bit in the studio and outdoors, you can actually set it for a function button and able to change that back and forth. Actually, I've done that with my menus. So if I want to do it with my menus, I can select, let's go to the wrench, go to favorites, let's go my menu, and then add items. So that one will be under the wrench. If I go to the top, should give me to the wrench. Let me try that, reverse. Screen setup, you want preview mode, and you want natural. So now, if I go to my menu, I go, and you can change this in order. So you can actually take natural view, you can put it on top of the number 1 if you like. So now if I go into this, set everything back on, now it's back to what you do with your mirrorless camera. And I think, okay, so it is in black white mode. Let me go back. So it allows you to change it. If you're doing something in the studio a lot and doing outdoors, you can actually set it in your My Menu or in your function buttons, just the convenience. So if you're shooting anything in low light, and that again, that could be a reception, it could be an event. It can also be a dance theater, things like that. You want to take pictures. And so it'll kind of brighten things up for you to focus on. We covered the different items you could have on your screen. And again, that was under your menu, going into screen setup, and the different things you want to turn on. So a lot of times I have most of the stuff on. The only thing I don't have on, it's what we call live view highlight alert. What it does, if you're blowing out your highlights, you get this flashing location of where the highlights are blown. It can be very distracting. The only time I'll probably use it when I'm doing landscape and want to make sure that I'm not blowing out my clouds, then not a problem. But if I'm doing street photography or sporting events, I usually will have that turned off. Film simulations. So the film simulations, we've been doing films. The company has been doing films for 85 years. They started doing films back in the cinematic world, motion pictures. So of course, black and white. So when they done black and white, we had the colors. Now you have different colors with contrast. So all the commercial films that we've done for commercial shooting allowed us to put that science in the camera. So pretty much the days of film, people either wanted to think about is what color film, what manufacturer film, and either they decide if it's Fuji, Kodak, or Ilford, or Agfa. So we have a heritage of many years, spent $1 million creating these film styles, what people call it film science. But now you have it all embedded into the camera. The nice thing about this is you could change them very quickly, or you could shoot at a RAW with one JPEG to give you as a reference. And of course the RAW, you could change it anytime you want with post-production software, Lightroom, Capture One, Luminar, One-on-One, Radiant. So there's a lot of things you could use out there that you could change it. It's the way you decide to make that image to look, the tonality, the sharpness, things like that. Preview picture, we just covered that a moment ago. That's when you want to see everything bright, not dark. Sometimes that hinders you if you're seeing shadows, very dark shadows. By turning this on, it will help you see a little bit more in low light. I mean, these cameras actually track very low light, -6 EV low light. You can do face detection, but for you to really see the person, so you're able to adjust your composition of the person, make sure it's enough out of the screen. By turning this on, it will help you compose better. Brightness, so you do have a screen set up for you want to control your brightness, both electronic viewfinder or your LCD. So if you're working outdoors a lot and it's bright, you could go into your screen setup under your wrench and you can actually brighten things up if it's going to make it very difficult to see it in the current situation. For me, I really don't have to touch this. I mean, that's pretty bright, some of these screens, but if I need to go brighter, this is where you want to do both for the electronic viewfinder and for your LCD. And you also could change the color adjustments on that too. Monochrome changes, it's kind of acting a little bit weird because of my green screen. but I'm going to switch over to the camera just to give you a better look. So if I go into my white balance, right now I have it auto, but I could go in there and change it. You can customize these with either a gray card or a white card. By taking a picture of the gray card, going into this mode, you could customize this. Also, you could do your Kelvin. You could adjust your Kelvins. So this is not bad if you need to just, if you're working with available light or LED light or anything like that. Then you have bright sunlight, overcast days. We also have fluorescent lights, 1, 2, and 3, and incandescent, and then underwater. When I say underwater, it could be you could use the camera in a underwater casing, or you're shooting at a aquarium through the glass. A lot of times what I do is if I'm shooting landscape early in the morning, say 7 in the morning, 6:30 in the morning, pretty much you have a blue cast in your foreground. You also have a blue cast in your shadows. So a lot of times I will set this for that blue hour to correct that blue, give you more available light. And you can also fine tune that too. By fine tuning it, you can move your joystick or your 4-way pad to any direction. You got to remember when you do this adjustment that you're making this adjustment for all your pictures on that mode. Same thing with your white balance. So when you do these corrections, you know you're going to affect it all. That's why a lot of times if you're going to do any corrections, just do it in your custom white balance so you'll know what each one does. Miniature. So when I was mentioning earlier, we have this mode on the command that allows you to do miniature. Well, actually, what they are, advanced filters. And that's ADV. So on your XT1, XT2, XT3s, and so on, your cameras, some cameras you got to go into your drive button. What it does is it gives you sort of fun pictures, fun styles. So by doing this, go to set your dial to ADV, advanced filters. And what I'll do, I'll press my front command wheel, and to give you an idea what front command wheel I'm talking about, from the factory, when you press this button, while you're in different modes, it will give you different options. So that options allows you to do control either high speed or HDR. And right after this one, I'll show you what the high modes mean or what the other modes will do for you. So if I go in here, press the front button, here's the different modes. So this is your toy camera. Let me switch it over back to this. So there's your toy camera, your miniature. Your miniature, actually, I tend to use it quite a bit. Miniature, what it does, whatever your focusing box, it's moved. If your focusing box is in the middle, the top of the box and the bottom of the box, it will be soft, out of focus. I call it soft. Anything to the left or the right will be in sharpness. It does increase your saturation and your contrast. I know some of the movies you might see look like it's a miniature setting. It's just a special effect that you could do from this camera. So to give you an idea, if I move the box up, you'll notice that it's in sharpness and everything behind or anything in the bottom is soft. If I move this to the bottom, it's focusing. So every time what's ever in the box, it's going to be sharp. Anything going to the left, you can move it to the left and things will be sharp, and everything to the right will be soft. So that's how you control. So when I do macro photography and the background can be very cluttered, I'll go into this mode. It really saturates the flower and everything in the background will be kind of soft and allows your subject just to concentrate on the flower itself. So that is your miniature. So next one down, pop color is just really, like it says, emphasizes the contrast in color. High key increases your brightness. Low key, again, it's just going to be very low light. Dynamic range, just really everything's, I think, just kind of reminds me of HDR. Soft focus, everything's soft. Partial color. So what it's doing right now, it's on red. So whatever's on red will be red. Everything else will be monochromatic or black and white. Then you have orange, you have yellow, you have green, you have blue, then you have purple. So for my wife, she likes playing this during the holidays, during Christmas. When you have Christmas lights, you have Christmas presents, you could play with a special effect. I've used this in concerts. I had a guitarist that had like a gold bass, and I just made it into, I set it for yellow, and you can really see the gold guitar really pop out, everything nice, black and white monochromatic. So some of these functions, without you have to go into the computer and make this in post-production, you can really take care of this in the computer or in the camera. And that way you can upload it to your phone right away and then put it on Facebook, whatever. Quickly, you could put that in your display. Let me go back to the PowerPoint. So here's the example when we used the miniature. We put the box to the bottom, so it kept the car that's in front in focus, and anything behind, you could tell by the middle car, it's already getting soft all the way to the rear car. So it's a fun effect of a filter. It can be for pretty much on everything, but I don't try to overdo it, but it's a nice feature. Probably it's one of the features I use the most from that advanced filter settings. So we have grain effect. Grain effect is what it says. It's kind of adding grain like film. I don't tend to use it. You know, it's almost, grain effect could be, some people might call it noise, but it's really trying to give you more grain. But what color chrome effect does, color chrome effect allows you to increase or decrease. So it's like weak or strong. And actually what it does, it gives you more contrast and more saturation. So if you were shooting Velvia, and I'll give you an example. When I was in Maine a couple of years ago for fall color, the locals will tell me that they haven't seen this extreme colorful brightness of these hues of these leaves, that probably it's been many years they have seen this. And I could go down the road, and if you go down the road with the canopy of the leaves over the road, it was actually give me an eye strain, a headache, because it was so vibrant. So when I did take some pictures with Velvia, it was too saturated, almost they bleed over each other. So you could have done is gone to Provia or stayed on Velvia and then weaken it so it won't be as saturated, or you could use any other film. You could use Provia and add it more saturated. So it's more of a control of your other chrome films. Again, chrome film is your Astia, your Provia, and your Velvia. So those are the things you could change. So they're fun. And then right below you call color chrome effects, blue. What it does is, if you're a landscape photographer, it will only enhance the hues of the blues, kind of make it more deeper blues. So if you're a landscape photographer, if you have a lake in front of you and the blue sky, it actually kind of mimics like having a polarizer, in fact, just the blues. Everything else would be left alone. So actually that was a good feature I've used for sunsets. Really give you that intense blues against the sunsets or anything else that has any blues. Mechanical shutter. So all these cameras are mechanical shutter except for the 100 series. Those do have a leaf shutter. So instead of having a mechanical shutter or plane from the top to bottom, this has a leaf shutter. It's like almost looking at a your shutter itself, open and closed like your iris. But mechanical leaf allows you to use flash control, including high-speed sync. So you do have some options, and most of the cameras, you can go to 4,000 of shutter speed or up to 8,000 of a second shutter speed. Electronic shutter, it does give you ability to go up to 132,000 of a shutter. You probably say, when do you would need that? So give you an example, if you were using one of our lenses, say our 56 1.2, on a bright day, you could be setting ISO 160 and it's still too bright. By increasing your shutter, it allows you to balance your light and get a proper exposure. So it's almost like adding a sort of your ND neutral filter. Unless you have a neutral density filter, you can add a 3-stop, 5-stop. It's really working the same when you increase your shutter speed. Disadvantage about your shutter speed on electronic, you cannot use flash or motion. Has a little effect at the moment. That's pretty much standard across all manufactured cameras. Till the day we get into a global shutter, that'll be a different technology in the future. Things will change. You could use mechanical and electronic at the same time. And I've done this quite a bit. So if I'm shooting, if I need to shoot wider open with my lens, my aperture, it will actually automatically will go from mechanical to 8,000 to electronic. So maybe I need to capture at 20,000 because I want to shoot it maybe at 1.0 or 1.2. And that ability, the camera will make that decision very quickly without you going in controlling it. Then you have your electronic front curtain. So it's a curtain that goes first, then your electronic or your mechanical. What the front curtain helps you is, especially if you have longer lenses, over 100, 150 millimeter, it helps you stabilize your movement of your handheld shots. So it only works up to 1/160/40th of a second. So if you're doing portraits, things like that, that not require much of an action, that work fine. And that's really useful, again, on your GFX and XT3 controls. But for most, our lenses have optical stabilizations, and of course, some of our bodies have body stabilizations. So we also have what we call manual focus assist modes. So when you manual focus, you have a couple of choices. You could do standard focus is what you see is what you get in focus. You have your digital focus split. So it splits to 2 images. And then we have peak focusing. And of course, now with XT3, we have microprism. And then XT4, same thing with the microprism itself, that it gives you sort of a old school look. Let me give you a little demonstration on that on the other camera. Let me change that. I'm going to change my white balance, get it back to normal before I switch over. So, okay. So if I go manual focus, right now, if I hit menu, actually, that's what I did. It's on the queue. Actually, I set it in the queue. I could go in here in the queue, select all my options for manual focus tools, assist tools. So if we start in the beginning, we have pretty much standard. Standard is what you see is what you get. Nothing fancy, just looking at it. But you do have option to zoom in. Your rear command window or your rear command wheel, that's this wheel that you could press it in and it will punch in your focus. So if I go in here, press it, it will focus in, and then you can focus and turn your focusing wheel till you're finally in what you want. You can actually turn the wheel left or right to move in and out your focus or get closer. So that gives you a good option to control it. When we introduced the XT1, we called in focus check. What it meant is anytime you were in focus and you turned the focus wheel, automatically it zoomed in. That got a little bit too much. So we added a firmware, so it's optional to have it on or off, but I prefer just using the wheel to focus. So if I wanted to go into, say, the next one, that is your split image. So your split image is sort of a center square, and you focus, and it gives you sort of a split. And so you definitely have to have lines like this has lines. You just got to get those lines parallel with the other line across. And so that's what split image, or we call it digital split image. Then we have diamond. So what the diamond is the old school way that we had diamond pattern in our prisms, and by turning in and out allows you to focus. And again, it's split on every corner, every line. So it's just another tool to use. Don't tend to use it much. I rather use focus peaking, and I'll show you what focus peaking does. So focus peaking, we have white, we have red, we have blue, and we have yellow. The reason we have quite a few colors, if you're using it manual focus on a bright white dress, white will not work well. And the difference, we have red low or color low, color high. To make it more accuracy, you want to go with the low red. That will be more accurate in your color. By turning this, let me double check, see what color I chose. Oh, some blue. Let's go to red. It's more visible to me. Red is pretty popular on cinematic world. It's good to see a low light, or night when it's very dark. So when you focus in and out, you want to start seeing the red pattern. So there's the red, that's in your focus. What I do when I do landscape, a lot of times I'll do manual focus, and I'll set it to red high. And that gives me sort of a hyper focus. What I'll do is I'll focus to the rock. Say I have a lake, there's a rock in front of the lake, and then I have these trees in the background. I'll focus on the rock, and I want the red shimmering to hit the rock and all the way to the trees the other side of the lake. And that's going to vary, of course, on your lens. The wider the lens, the more depth of field you're going to have. Also, the bigger the number, your depth of field is also going to increase. So by those two adjustments, I could definitely get the red from the front to the back. And that's sort of what I use for my depth of field scale to look at. You do have a scale, but this is more visual to look at for your depth of field for sharpness. So that's a really good tool to do. So like I was saying earlier, there was a setting, it's called focus check. I don't recommend it unless you're focusing with just manual lenses with adapter, or you only like working manually. It just helps you to zoom in, but it's so much easier to use the rear command wheel and use that when you do need it to zoom in to focus. So your autofocus settings, we do have, like I mentioned earlier, your single focus. Each time you press the shutter halfway, it takes one shot. So what it does, when you press your shutter, it takes the metering, exposure, and then it's single focus all at once. If you have your on C for continuous tracking or continuous mode focus, anytime you're moving or your subject's moving or you're moving, it's constantly focusing to the subject. So that's useful if you're trying to, say, filming, or you want to track some multiple exposures on the subject coming forward. Maybe somebody who's a runner, doing motorsports, also nature, wildlife, birds of prey when they're doing their movement from left to right or front to back. And that works really good on tracking. And then again, you have your manual focus. There is a setting we call pre-focus, and the pre-focus, I'll switch over to the camera. And for pre-focus to work, you got to make sure you're in autofocus. That's the only time it's going to work. So if you go into your menu focus, it's on the very second to the bottom. So what pre-focus does, it's always going to try to constantly focus the whole time. So you move the camera and it's focusing. You don't have to press the shutter to do this. Automatically, it's focusing. I don't tend to use it. You'll know when this is turned on because you constantly hear the lens going in and out. That's maybe because you turned this on by accident. But what it does, if you're, say, taking a picture of a football player and he's going to hike the ball and you don't know the moment he's going to throw the ball, you could do this pre-focus and it's constantly focusing on the subject for every movement. It definitely does do a drain to the battery. Only thing I got to say is try it, see if you like it. And if it works for you, great. If it doesn't, for me, I don't really use it. If I have to, I'll do the pre-shots to do that instead. For me, that's much effective for me, but pre-focus has been around for a while for our cameras. So we do have what we call for the GFX, just like the X-series we called boost mode. On the GFX, we call it rapid mode, same thing. What I'll do is increase some of the voltage to either improve high-speed refresh rate on your eyepiece, your LCD, also to wake up your camera when it goes to sleep. During the XT1, the XT2, you need the grip to do that because it needed additional batteries. But when we went to XT3, you could have boost mode without the grip. But on the GFX, you could do it also without the grip. Just allows you different modes of what you want to be a little bit more responsive, and it gives you different components that you could choose from. Spot mode, you got your spot metering, your zone and multi-bracketing, or multi-tracking. What spot mode or spot mode means. So some of the cameras, XT1, XT2, XT3, you have on the back, right below your shutter, is your spot meter. So if you go to the far left, you see the dot, that is spot meter. The next one is your center average. And then you have your multi. Multi, what it does, it breaks down your screen, your image, maybe in quadrants. It looks at your light and color, makes a quick assessment to see how much color it needs, how much light it needs. And then you have your average, center average, or your average. Most of the time, I would say 90% you're gonna be on multi. The multi works pretty much for everything. I think the only time I've done average or center average when I'm taking pictures with the surfers, because I only got one surfer and then the blue water, not much to make it, make difference in lighting or into color. But I will say, I think most people probably be 100% on multi. If you look at the XT4, we actually removed it. We actually have our still in drive mode, but you can actually place it on any of your function buttons to turn it on. So that's a nice thing, that you can have it in your Q button, or you can have it into your function button, or it's part of your function of your camera from your controller. So for spot meter, let me see if I could show you what the spot meter is. So if I go into my camera, your spot meter is whatever's in that green box, your focusing box. So if you make your box smaller, that's how small the information is going to spot your meter. So that could be like your 5%. The bigger you get, the more percentage you increase. So whatever average light meter is metering, or is taking an average, it's whatever is in that box. So I'll give you an example of, say you're doing black-white street photography, and you have a person sitting on the bench, and the light of the sun just going right above them, but everything else in shadows. What happens if you meter the shadows? They're trying to correct for the dark areas. That means your subject will be in darkness. So what you do is you definitely want to use your spot meter over your subject so that's properly lit and less about the shadows. So there's things that you could definitely use that for controlling your lighting. So we also have, if you're doing continuous mode on focusing, you do have ability to do continuous tracking. Most of the time you'll be in continuous tracking for focus, and also probably going to do maybe 3 frames, 8 frames, 10 frames, 15 frames. These are the different mode settings that allows you to behave to your subject. I'm going to switch mine to the camera and see if I get that for you. So under focus, your AC focus mode, and it does give you a little bit description. This is your default. More likely 99% you're going to be here. This is the tracking that's going to be tracking pretty much your center subject. It's going to be highly active, and it's going to be zoned to the center. And you could actually you could switch your zones back and forth with your box. And that's if you're in a zone focus. Next one down, it's going to ignore your subject if it's going behind a structure. So think of this cat going behind a tree or behind a boulder. If you have a delay, it's not going to refocus on the tree or the boulder. It will have a little constant delay to get enough time for the animal to go past the tree and stay the same distance of focusing. So that means your subject will be in focus. If you had your mode to focus quickly, that means it will focus on the cat, then refocus on the tree, and then refocus back on the cat. chances are you might lose your subject that way. So with this mode, you could have a little slight delay and still capture your subject. Next one now, number 3. This is good when you have anything like motorsports, when they're going acceleration, deceleration, because they're going different turns. So anything that's happening to move fast and slow, this is a good mode to do that, because it's predicting that your subject is going to change its movement back and forth. So this is a good move to do that. So when I do motorsports, this is a good way to do that, to put that mode. This is for studying objects. So if you're using a wide lens and so all of a sudden something comes in to the window, it will start tracking. So anything, this can also work good too. If you're trying to track a bird, but you're having trouble tracking it because it has a long lens, if you set it on this, as soon as it appears, it will start tracking right away. So it's using all 400 focusing points. And then this one, it's very erratic, side to side, back and forth. So that's why it gives you an example of a tennis player. So something that your subject constantly be moving sideways, back in different directions. This is a good mode. And then the last one, you can customize what you want. You could change your sensitivity. You can also change the speed of the tracking. And then you can actually change what you want to do with this. If you want to use auto, if you want to use the front subject or back subject. So this is a good way to switch your areas from the keys. And then again, mostly you'll probably be using number 1. And if you don't know, you can always start with number 1 if you're shooting birds, animals, or people that you're trying to track. And if that doesn't work, you could move on down to the next one. But overall, number 1 will do a pretty good job. But if you need to customize it, you could go to number 6 and tweak that a little bit for your particular unique situation. So your focusing points. So the current cameras do have 425 focusing points. I think XT2 had 325. So you do have, what it does, even if you select 117, you still have all focusing points still active. It's just going to make it visible on your screen. To give you an idea, let me switch over to my camera, go to your focusing points. So if I go to 425, and if select my points, no, that's not, so let me, actually you have to make your points visible. So you have to select that first. So let's go turn this on. And maybe I'll press my key. Actually, I might have my points turned off. So what it does, you can see 425 points or you can see 117 points. But all the points, even if you don't see it, they're still there. It's just what it does, it resizes it a little bit bigger so you have a better way to see it and gives you more of a spacing. So what it does, it's mostly a tent. Do you want to focus in big steps with your box, or do you want to focus in smaller steps? So if I move back to focus again, go to 425. It's going to have smaller increments, back to forth, left to right. So it really depends on the subject. Do you want the box to take bigger jumps, left to right, up to down, or you want to make it smaller increments? And that's how you control that, how you want to focus your box. So joystick, I think ever since we had our XT2, we had our I believe XT30, trying to think XT20, pretty much all the cameras now getting the joystick, but a lot of them are losing their 4-pad, the 4 keypad. And to show you what the 4 keypad is this 4-way, so it's up and down, left and right, just around the menu. The joystick's kind of doing a lot of the work for you, but it is staying with the XT series, that 4-way keypad. So if you need the 4-way keypad, then you definitely want to look into more the XT3, XT4. But what it does, it allows us, without that four-way pad, allows us to make sure that the camera stays very compact in the back, allows us to have a bigger LCD screen. So there's a give and a take, but if it's a four-way pad that you must have, then you definitely want to look at your XT2s or XT3s, XT4s. Those cameras will have it. Your joystick. So your joystick, if you press your joystick in, you have different modes. I'll switch over to my camera to show you. So if you press your joystick in once, oops, press it and lock it in. You have a choice to activate to unlock it or off. So if you're a person that's constantly tripping, and it's very difficult to hit it by accident, but if you want to turn it off, you could turn it off. You can also push to unlock or just leave it on. Leave it on, that's where you find most of the time it's left on. You can press menu OK to get you back in there. So that's what it controls your joystick. So it's good for moving your focusing box, doing your menu selection. So I can move it up and down to select the menus left and right to choose the different segments or different departments. So it does give you ability to go through a lot of things very quickly. So touchscreen. So pretty much, I think now every camera has a touchscreen. It will allow you to select your focus, allow you to select your menus, but also a lot of times you can actually press your nose and relocate your focusing box. So if your images look like they're getting out of focus and you look back, you might see your box to the left bottom or to the right bottom, depends how close your nose touches it. If that becomes a problem, you could turn it off. Again, you could turn it off from the display or you could turn it off completely. And to do that completely, you want to go into your menu, buttons, because it's considered as a button. And we usually put it in the very last of the menu. And right here, you could turn certain things off or completely turn it off. And also you have the subject. You actually activate what portion of the screen do you want that to be controlled for touchscreen. So maybe if you're pressing your nose to the left, maybe you want to just have the right activated. So you do have that option. If you happen to press your nose to the right, you could actually have it sent to the left or vice versa to the top. So you do have some control or completely turn off. But for most, from the out of the box, it will be the whole screen. So you do have that option to do that control. So if you notice your image is being out of focus or your menus are popping up then where you don't want it, you could assign that portion of the LCD to a different location, or you could temporarily turn it off for the moment. Face detection. We do have options for face detection. We did set it in your, so it is set for most cameras in your menu, and that can be customized on your Q menu. So by pressing your menu once or your Q menu, so I'll press it once. You want to drop down, use your rear command wheel, scroll it to your right. Now we have face detection. We have eye detection, so it's looking at both eyes and looking at the face. And then you can select just right eye or left eye. So when I was doing weddings back in the film days, I always was asking the bride, what's your better half of her face? Because if she has conscious not liking her particular sides, she might not like the pictures. So if she tells me I prefer my left side, then I probably would set this to the left side. So that means it's constantly focusing to the left eye, left side of the face. And so if you're definitely shooting wide open, that will guarantee you that's being focused to that side of the face or that right eye. I think for most of the time I'm shooting with people with eye detection, both eyes, or you can have just the face. So you do have that control. Of course, if you're doing landscape, product shots and everything, macro, you don't need this off. You can turn it off. That's why it's good to have in your Q menu. So you have quick access to that feature. Let's see, did I go wrong direction? Yes, I did. Let me go back. So we do have our choices for shutter speeds, and that is set on your drive menu. And once again, if you look, they're set right here. That's your CL for continuous low, CH continuous high. So give you a closer example. I'll go on to my camera mode. If I go to CL, and again, I'll press my front function button. That's the one in the front. That's your drive section. And let me adjust this so it doesn't give me. So if I go to CL, press that button, that's where it's going to give me my options. Do I want to do 3 frames, 4 frames per second, 5.7 frames? So that's what CL means. It's going to be on low settings. They're going to vary in different generation camera, your film speeds, but that's usually anything under 8 frames per second. If I switch over to CH, I'll have 11 frames and go down, you have 8 frames. But if you look at the little message below, it says if you want to shoot a higher speed above 10, then you have to shoot or switch over to electronic shutter to get the higher burst, the maximum burst. JPEGs, you'll get 145 images. And again, I'm showing you on, I believe this is the XT3. I think we have a bigger buffer on XT4. And then JPEGs and RAW 35, or RAW only 36. If you notice, right above 11 frames per second, it's grayed out. It will not allow me to go up. The reason is, if you look at the speed, say 20 frames or 10 frames, just to the right, ES, it's telling you have to go into electronic shutter. So that's another reason I like the Q button. So when I press Q, I could go in, go down to my shutter, turn my mechanical wheel, the rear wheel, go electronic, very quick. Then I'll hit my function button, and there you go. They're back on. Now I could go 20 frames with no crop, or I could go with 10 frames with 1.2 crop. If you're using a long lens, you're usually using the center sweet spot when you're doing tracking for automotive sports, birds, action, things like that. The crop doesn't really bother me, but you could go all the way to 30 frames per second. I've done 30 frames per second, automotive sports, shooting Formula One cars. It's like watching a movie. You're getting so many bursts like you're shooting a film. And just more images to edit. So I'm usually shooting sports, automotive racing between 5 and 8 frames, and just strictly JPEGs, because the JPEGs are really good out of the camera. The advantage about shooting mirrorless cameras is what you see is what you get. So there should be no surprises when you look at your image. And a lot of times, I'm not reviewing my images because I'm concentrating my focus on the sports. As soon as I spend time looking at the LCD, I'm missing the shots, and some of them probably be the better shots. As long as you're seeing what you're getting, you know that you have it in your card. You can always examine it later when you're sitting down and go through some of the images. But that's the beauty about mirrorless. You know where you're going to get. And that's why more and more people are shooting JPEGs. When I shoot weddings, I was just shooting JPEG. The only time I was shooting RAW, when I'm shooting noon with the light conditions very harsh, that I knew only in RAW I was able to pull the highlights and shadows. You can still pull out some details now with JPEGs, but your RAW is going to give you your maximum ability to pull things out. So again, the same location for your bracketing or your drive button. You could bracket several things. So what it does, you could bracket exposure, 3 stops. So 1 stop above, 1 stop below. And you could do that in increments, like a third, half a stop, full stop. And just to give you an idea, I'll go into that mode, press my button. So here, allow you to bracket how many steps and how many increments. So if you say, I want to bracket 7 frames, 9 frames, if you look at the bottom scale, it's going to expand how many stops across according to the frame. But also it's going to expand, depends how many increments of your stop. If you're going to do a third stop, 2/3, a full stop. If you notice, the higher I go, the more expansion. So if you're going to do HDR out of the camera in post-production, this is where you could do all these controls up to 9 frames, and you can compose it into your post-production software. On X Pro 3 and XT4, that is built into the cameras, and it will do 3 shots, and it will allow you to do 3 shots, and you do have a degree of strength, 800%, 400%, 200, or auto. Any of those percentage, your HDR does not look overcooked. It's still very clean. But if you wanted to have full control and do it in the back end, this is where you could do, you're bracketing multiple shots and then bring it in and group them in Photoshop. You can layer them. So that's where you have those controls. If you want to do film simulation, so for film, let's go back. So that's for 100 exposure. That's for exposure. Then you have ISOs. So you can bracket your ISOs by third stop, 2/3, 1. Film simulation, that's where a lot of people do. We actually have ex-photographers who do just JPEGs. They're happy right out of the camera, the JPEGs. And this is where you can customize. And this is where I could customize my JPEGs. And you go to your right and you could change them. So a lot of times I'll choose Provia because I'm going to do landscape. I'll do Velvia, choose Velvia. And then I like to do a black and white with a red filter. So I could go to Acros, choose my red filter. Now, what it does, it only takes one picture and the processor will create those 3 images. So if you're shooting RAW and JPEG, you'll still have your RAW untouched, but your JPEGs, the camera will generate 3 different JPEGs, and depends what mode and what color. It does it very seamless in the background. I get folks say, well, it only took 1 picture. Well, it's the processor that's generating those pictures. You're not going to hear 3 shots. You also can balance your custom white balance or your white balance and focus. So when you want to do focus bracketing, this is the mode. So you want to do how many frames? You could do 99 frames, or actually you could do 999. It's definitely going to depend on how much memory you're going to have in your card. Then it's going to tell you how many increments, how many steps in front of the lens it's going to do. So you could do, depends on the spacing in the front. You go from 1 to 10, and then intervals. So what intervals mean is when it takes 1 shot, do you want it to pause 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, up to 10 seconds? Just in case there's slight movement in the camera on the tripod, I will usually set it for 2 or 3 seconds. Usually by 1 second, 2 seconds, there's no mechanical movement. Of course, you could set it to electronic shutter and you have no movement. So you do have that choice. So this is a good way to bracket exposure or bracket your focusing. So it's good for product shots, macro, landscape. Of course, it's going to depend also on the size of the card, but you can do your layering in your software, whatever your software choice. If it's going to be Lightroom, Photoshop, anything like that. And those are your different bracketings that you're going to be able to choose from. Back to my PowerPoint. Does anybody have any questions? Chris, anything that I haven't seen the chat? What kind of questions we have? About 15 minutes. I want to make sure I continue. We can put the questions at the end. But for the moment, I'll continue. So this is what I was discussing earlier on the XT4 and also X Pro 3. This is what we have new to the camera, HDR mode. So you can actually control by using 800%, 200%. So this is something new they're only going to see on the new cameras. Here are 2 samples. I believe this shot was taken at the Bradbury building. It's in downtown. This building, I believe, has been around since the 1920s. Actually, they have their elevator in glass, so you can see all this. It's a very unique building that you go in and take pictures. If you're in downtown in LA, check this out. The architect's really beautiful. So what you're showing on the left picture is with the HDR turned off. And if you look to the picture on the right with the HDR, now you start picking up the wood that used to be in the shadow on the left. And if you look also in the back of the picture with the wood, it actually is picking up more detail. So it's can be very subtle, but very clean to work with HDR. And then you also, and it depends on your screen you're looking at. It can be very dependent because you could lose some of the blues depends on the screens you're looking at. But it's definitely will pick up more sky when I'm looking at my shot and my screen. But so it's really nice. It can do this in the camera. It takes three shots. it could definitely be a handheld. I've done this in sunset, I've done this in dark, and it's in focus and it's sharp. So it's a fantastic feature that I've been using quite often now, taking advantage of it. We have your multiple exposure. So multiple exposure on your camera. This is a new feature that's on the X Pro 3, X100V, XT4. On the XT4, we used to have multiple exposure on the drive button. We replaced it with HDR. It's not been removed. You can actually program it into a function button or just go into your menu. But now instead of just doing 2 photos, you can actually do up to 9. And you can actually select it as additive, average, or bright, or dark. So what it does, each pose or each picture you take, it will sort of, in pose, you have the leading image, so you can pose the image to overlap. So you do get the back image that you just shot previously, and then overpose on top of your new subject, and it will do that up to 9 frames. And you can try different ones. I think I have a sample image done by average. So here, I think this is one of the shots from Michael. He had this statue of angel in the background. He took a picture of the statue, and then he took a picture of a flower and superimposed it. To the right, he actually had a statue of a lion, and then he took a picture of his daughter and then superimposed it, and that's his daughter. So it's more in the fine art. But if you really want to see what people are really doing with this double exposure, check out Suzanne Stein website. She's from New York. She's a street photographer. Just like we were talking about on the second slide, how you imagine your images in your head before you take the picture. And what she actually looks in the street and she looks at 2 different subjects and puts it together and takes the picture, and really whatever she thought in her head, she actually will create that in her camera. And she started this just with the 2 images when we had the cameras. And I would highly recommend check her website. It's really, really neat what she does in her street photography in New York. She was one of the speakers when we had back in April, Friday Forum. We have Friday Forums every other Friday. So for this Friday, we're skipping this Friday, but it'll be next Friday. You can always go to our website and find that for events. It's for usually about an hour. It's a good, different type of speakers every time. The reason I'm bringing this up, it's not in our current model cameras, but this used to be in our cameras back in XE1s and I think in the T100s. And some of the cameras, when we had electronic shutter, we had this special feature that we called it sound flash off. It's kind of confusing. What it does, it turns off your flash. It goes to electronic shutter to keep it quiet, but it also turns off your assist LED light for focusing. I normally will call this under the radar mode. What happened is when I want to take pictures at night and I'm taking street photography and I don't want anybody to indicate I'm taking pictures, the LED mode turns off, you're not making sound, your flash is not going off. And I'll take it to the next step further. I'll turn off the LCD or LCD so it's not reflecting off my glasses. But what happens when people forget that they have turned this on and their flash is not working, they're usually complaining through service that my flash is not working. What happens is they forgot they turned this on and they haven't turned it off. So today now with our current cameras, even with XT2s, XT3s, and XT4s, you physically go like we did in the Q menu, just make your mechanical shutter to go electronic. And if you don't want your LED light to come on, I will go into my focusing, go to manual, and you still use your back focus button to focus, and we'll turn off the LED. So there's a way around it, and very easy way to get out of it too. We do have a sports finder mode. So if you look at our X100, X100V or a X Pro 2 or X Pro 3, it is an optical piece. If you look at it, you can still see the mouse, the white, because it's optical. But also, we call this camera, it's a hybrid viewfinder. So you can actually switch it on and actually make it electronic, But in a hybrid view, optical, you can still have all your information. What it does, it uses an OLED to project your crop lines, your information, all that. And what it does, it gives you over 110%. So you get not just your focal length, but it also gives you a 10%, 18% outside the line. What's nice about rangefinders, that you can see your subject coming into the box, and so it kind of gets you ready to compose your subject when it actually physically goes into your composition. So that's what Spore Finders is, that you can put into on your camera, turn it on, and it reacts the same thing. So you'll see the square box, and that square box, that's where it's going to capture. So really it's capturing a little bit more inside the sensor, but it allows you to bring the subject in, and you know it's walking into your subject. It's good to use also for long telephoto lenses and sports mode. That's what people call it, sports mode. But it's also for street photography because you can really see your subject coming into your frame. Pre-shots. This is the one I was telling you earlier. I prefer this than pre-focus. Pre-shots does, it will, when you have pressed your shutter, it will start recording images. And I think it records up to 15 to the memory. When that 15 records, it will dump those 15, and not all at the same time. It will start dumping the very last of the 15, and it substitutes it for every 15. So the most it will keep out 15. And when you fully see the bird start taking off, you fully press your shutter, and then maybe you're already shooting 30 frames per second, or I'm sorry, it's not going to be 30 frames because this is only a mechanical shutter. So it's either going to be 11 frames or 15 frames, depends which camera. It will capture those 15 frames or 11 frames. So now you got the 15 frames before the bird take off, but you got some of the motion, and then you got those additional frames that you saw the bird taking off. So it's like, that's the more preferred feature I would definitely use. It's on an X-T3 and their newer cameras, so it's a good good feature to use. So that's considered pre-shot. I'm sorry, the sports finders on mechanical, the pre-shots is an electronic shutter. I got that reverse again. Pre-shots electronic and sports finder mechanical. Contrast control. So this is what you able to use dynamic range. Just to give you a quick look where our dynamic range, we always put it on the Q button. So when you press your Q button, it's this dynamic range. So you have auto, you turn your rear command wheel, it will go to 100, turn it again, goes 200, goes again to 400. If you don't see it go 400, because 400 does require ISO 800. Your dynamic range for 200 does require ISO 400. What it does, it needs that leadway of that extra dynamic range from the ISOs. And 800 is still very clean. So to me, a lot of times I'm shooting automatic ISO. So it automatically will turn that feature on and allows me to go all the way 400%. Auto does a very good job. I think I'll find myself in auto most of the time. But if I want to take detail, give you an example, if you're taking a picture of the bride dress and the groom tux, the 400% will give you detail in the dress and detail in the tux. Because most cameras, this technology that we use because of our sensor, you'll lose the tux because you're trying to save the dress, and the tux looks going to look like deep black, like you penciled in with a Sharpie with no detail. But this will actually can see some of the threads in the tux, how much detail you get. And at the same time, you'll get the bride's white dress, the sequins and the decorations. Of course, the brides spend more money on their dress, up to $10,000 or more for their dresses. So this is an example. To the left, with scene recognition or dynamic range turned off. To the right, it's turned on by 2 stops. So that is your dynamic range at 400% at ISO 800. So if you look at the doorway, you actually got more detail. And again, it's really affected to what screen you're using. But you'll notice under the eaves, you'll see on the right, you have more detail, less shadows. And then in the background, the sky, you got more detail in the clouds. So it's also very helpful for your landscape, on people, and then also for landscape too, some of the macro photography for flowers. I will show you that on the next slide. Again, This is showing the sky. You see more of the sky detail with the blues on 400% with standard from 100% on the left. Using the 100%, 400%, you also get detail on your pets. The hairs have more defined, better separation, especially if you have an animal hair that's white and black. It gives a better way to separate that instead of blown out just on the whites. Here gives you an example on the flowers, and you may see it, you may not. On the far left is 100%, the midter's 200, and then the far right. As soon as you go to 400%, you start picking up details of the flower petals. Some of the flower petals have this little texture. So on 400%, it will give you more detail on the flowers. So really, it could be used pretty much for everything for that control. So you can either stay at auto, and if you do shoot your camera at 800 shutter speed, it will push it up to 400 if need. The camera will make that decision. Quickly, our camera is well known. It's back in XT2 for cinema. We definitely made a big jump in XT3 and H1, and then XT4. We added more cinema. Both will give you the same quality because we're using the same sensor and processor between the XT3, XT4. It's a very capable camera. Again, 4K at 30, 4K at 60. On XT3, you could do high def at high speed at 120, and XT4 240. Nice thing about the XT4, it does give you in-body stabilization on 6 stops. So it'll give it to you all your primes and the zooms, additional to the zooms. And so it easily will give you stabilization on handheld. We got 1 minute, so I'm going to skip some of the video stuff. I want to just give you some of the detail why we have dynamic range compared to our customers, other manufacturers. If you look at this, this is our X-Trans sensor. A Bayer sensor is a 2x2. So one line will have a blue and another line will have a green, or another line will have a red. Our sensors, we were able to have 2 channel colors on one line, and each line, maybe more in another line. So your blues will give you your shadows, and your reds will give you your highlights. That's how we're able to maintain dynamic range with one shot just on your JPEG. Of course, in RAW, you can really pull out a lot of details in your highlights and your shadows, but this is really where it excels on your JPEGs. Only Fujifilm has developed, has created this sensor called X-Trans. Nobody else does this. It really benefits. You could shoot just JPEGs to give you that extra dynamic range control.